The gate didn't just close, it ended something. The sharp click echoed louder than it should have, settling deep in my chest like a final decision already made. It wasn't gentle, not even polite. It was precise, cold, like a line being drawn that I wasn't allowed to cross. Stephanie stood on the other side, perfectly framed against her spotless gray patio. Everything behind her looked curated, controlled, intentional. And she didn't look angry. She looked bored. That was the part that stung the most. Anger means you matter enough to feel something. Boredom means you don't matter at all. Sorry, Alexis, she said smoothly, though there was no real apology in her voice. Her eyes moved over me slowly, carefully, like she was evaluating something she didn't like. My worn denim apron, the dirt under my nails, the basket of fresh basil I held like it actually meant something. But look at you, she continued, gesturing lightly, as if explaining something obvious. We're hosting the inner circle tonight. Investors, brand partners, people who expect a certain standard. She paused just long enough to let her judgment settle. Honestly, she added, almost casually, you're just off-brand. And that was it. No hesitation. No space for me to respond. She turned her back on me, the soft silk of her blouse catching the sunlight as she walked away. Already done with the conversation. Already done with me. I stood there, staring at the painted wood of the fence between our townhouses. Off-brand. Not we don't have space. Not maybe next time. Just wrong. Like I didn't belong in the picture she was building. Like I was something that needed to be edited out. My husband Mason stood barely 10 feet away on her patio. He had seen everything, every word, every second. He held a glass of expensive wine, his posture stiff, his expression carefully neutral. He watched his sister humiliate his wife. He watched her shut a gate in my face. He watched her decide I wasn't good enough to be seen. And he did nothing. Not a word, not a step forward. Not even a glance in my direction. He just took a slow sip of his wine and turned to laugh at something. One of the guests said. That silence hit harder than the gate. It filled the space between us, heavy and undeniable. For years, I told myself it was just how their family worked. That Stephanie was difficult, and Mason was just trying to keep the peace. But standing there, breathing in the faint smell of expensive catering and the exhaust from the luxury cars lined along the street, something finally became clearer. He wasn't keeping the peace. He was protecting his place. I looked down at the basil in my hands, bright green, alive. It smelled like earth, like rain, like something real. Everything on the other side of that fence felt staged. The gray furniture, the perfect lighting, the carefully ranged food, the laughter that sounded just a little too polished. It wasn't a gathering. It was a performance. And I had just been cut from the cast. So I didn't knock. I didn't call Mason's name. I didn't give them the reaction they were probably expecting. The emotional outburst they could dismiss, label, and forget. Instead, I turned around. 5 slow, steady steps carried me back to the center of my yard. Every movement felt controlled, intentional. I set the basket of basil down on the reclaimed wood table, the one Mason and I had built together 2 years ago, back when he still acted like this life mattered. Then I walked to the woodpile. I chose 3 pieces of seasoned oak, solid, dry, perfect for a clean, hot burn. I carried them to the pizza oven. My oven, the one I had designed and built with my own hands over 3 long weekends the previous summer. Its curved dome was covered in broken tiles I had collected from renovation scraps. It wasn't sleek or modern, but it was strong. It was real. It stood in the corner of the garden like something waiting to wake up. I stacked the wood, added kindling, and struck a match. The fire caught quickly, a bright orange glow spreading through the dark interior. Flames curled upward, alive and hungry, and smoke rose into the evening air carrying the rich, unmistakable scent of oak. Technically, I was just making dinner, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like I was sending a message. On the other side of the fence, everything stayed quiet, controlled, gray. The guests stood in neat groups, balancing tiny plates of carefully ranged food, speaking in low, measured tones. On my side, the fire crackled. Loud, warm, alive. The heat pushed back the cool evening air, wrapping round me like something familiar. I moved to the vertical garden along the fence and began picking more basil, tearing the leaves free with a soft snap, releasing their sharp, fresh scent into the air. That's when I saw Mason turn. Just slightly. His eyes moved toward the smoke, toward the flickering firelight dancing through the leaves. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something in his expression. Something like longing. He loved my pizza. He loved the way I made the dough from scratch, letting it rest for 2 full days until it developed that deep, rich flavor. He loved sitting out here, sharing cheap wine, talking about nothing and everything until midnight. But then Stephanie said something quiet, sharp. Mason flinched, and just like that, he turned away, back to the gray, back to the performance. He chose it. And for the first time, I understood why. It wasn't just weakness. It was conditioning. Mason had grown up believing that love had to be earned. That approval was something given only when you fit perfectly into the role expected of you. And Stephanie had always been the one handing it out. He didn't stand up to her because, in his mind, she was the authority. Challenging her meant losing everything. So he paid the price. And tonight, that price was me. A strange calm settled over me. If he wanted that life, the gray, controlled, perfect version of everything, he could have it. But I wasn't going to shrink myself to fit into it. Inside, the dough was ready. I dusted the wooden peel with flour and started chopping garlic. The steady rhythm of the knife thud, thud, thud cut cleanly through the quiet evening. This wasn't just dinner anymore. It was something else. The first person to notice wasn't one of Stephanie's guests. It was Mrs. Patricia. She leaned over the fence, her silver hair wild, her sharp eyes scanning my yard as she sniffed the air like she was tracking something important. "Is that oak?" she called out. I looked up, a little surprised. "Yes, seasoned oak." She nodded, then pointed toward the oven. "And that basil? You grew it." "I did," I said. "From seed. It's the same kind my grandmother used to grow." She studied me for a long moment, then glanced towards Stephanie's patio. The difference between the two spaces couldn't have been clearer. Over there, perfect. Quiet, controlled. Over here, warm, messy, alive. My grandmother grew basil like that, she said softly, on a fire escape. It was the only green thing we had. She didn't ask permission. She simply opened the gate and walked in. Soon after, Haley came outside. My daughter moved straight to the table, washing her hands before joining me like this was the most natural place in the world. "Can I do the pepperoni?" she asked, her eyes glowing in the firelight. "You can do whatever you want," I said. "It's your kitchen." And just like that, we found our rhythm. I worked the oven. Haley handled the toppings with careful focus. Mrs. Patricia sat at the table, tearing pieces of crust and nodding with quiet approval. It wasn't perfect. Flour dusted the table. Sauce dripped onto the wood. The air was thick with smoke, cheese, and laughter. But it was real. And as the smell of baking pizza drifted over the fence, something started to shift. Heads turned, conversations paused. Guests glanced at their small, cold appetizers, then toward the rising steam from my oven. Even from where I stood, I could feel it. That pull. Because what I had built here wasn't just food. It wasn't just a garden. It was something people recognized, even if they couldn't explain it. A place that felt alive. A place that didn't need approval. Mason was still standing on the other side, surrounded by gray. But the line between, Our worlds was no longer as solid as that gate had tried to make it. Because smoke doesn't stop for fences. And neither does something real. The smoke from my fire didn't respect property lines. It drifted across the fence, carrying the scent of something real into the heart of Stephanie's artificial kingdom. And judging by the way her guests were starting to shift and whisper, they were starving for it. Stephanie's patience broke, not with a shout, but with a text. My phone buzzed on the flour-dusted table. Can you tone it down? We're trying to have a conversation over here. I looked at the screen, then at Mason. He was standing by the punch bowl, his back to me, typing furtively. He wouldn't even look at me. He was delivering his sister's orders like a beautiful soldier. Tone what down? I muttered to myself. The joy. The text went unanswered. Haley was laughing at something Mrs. Patricia had said. A deep, belly-shaking laugh that was the best sound in the world. I wasn't going to silence my daughter to accommodate Stephanie's ego. 5 minutes later, the escalation began. It smells like burning fat, Stephanie announced loudly. She wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. She was performing for her audience. She wrinkled her nose delicately, waving a hand in front of her face. Mason, darling, could you go check? I think the neighbors are burning garbage again. The neighbors? Not Alexis. Not his wife. The neighbors. Mason walked to the fence. He looked tired. His tie was loosened, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Alexis, he said, his voice low. Steph says the smoke is bothering the guests. Can you put it out? I looked at the fire burning clean and bright. It's oak, Mason. It smells like a campfire. And we're cooking dinner. Can't you cook inside? He hissed. This is important. That guy over there, the one in the blue suit, that's Marcus Thorne, the food critic. Stephanie is trying to get him to feature her design firm in his lifestyle column. Marcus Thorne. I glanced over. A man in a sharp blue suit was standing near the edge of the patio, looking bored. He was holding a canope like it was a dead insect. If she wants to impress a food critic, I said evenly, maybe she should have served him hot food. Mason's face tightened. Just put it out, Alexis. Please, for me. No, I said for you. I would do a lot of things. But I won't make myself small so your sister can feel big. Not anymore. He stared at me, stunned. I had never said no to him like that. Not when it came to Stephanie. He opened his mouth to argue, but Stephanie's voice cut through the air like a whip. Oh, forget it. Mason. She strode over, her heels clicking aggressively on the slate. She stood next to him, glaring over the fence. She didn't look at me. She looked past me, addressing her guests. So, sorry everyone. It's just a little rustic next door. Some people don't understand neighborhood covenants about open fires and sanitation. She pulled out her phone. The flash went off blindingly bright in the twilight. She took a photo of me, apron stained with flour, hair messy, holding a pizza peel. Posting this to the neighborhood watch group, she announced cheerfully. Caption: When the neighborhood eyesore ruins your evening. Mrs. Patricia stood up slowly. She wiped tomato sauce from her lip with a silk napkin. Sanitation, she repeated, her voice low and dangerous. Stephanie blinked, noticing Mrs. Patricia for the first time. Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. You really shouldn't be eating that. Whatever it is, it's not safe. It's pizza, Mrs. Patricia said, and it's the best thing I've eaten in 20 years. Unlike those frozen kitchens you're serving. Stephanie's smile faltered. Those are artisanal tartlets. They're cardboard, Mrs. Patricia snapped. And your wine is CKD. The silence on the patio was absolute. Marcus Thorne, the food critic, turned his head. He looked at Stephanie, then at the fence, then at Mrs. Patricia, and for the first time all night, he looked interested. The mood on Stephanie's patio shifted instantly. The air, previously thick with polite boredom, crackled with tension. Marcus Thorne had taken a step closer to the fence, his gaze fixed on Mrs. Patricia. Stephanie noticed her eyes darted between the food critic and the eccentric neighbor. Calculating, she realized she was losing control of the room, losing the narrative she had so carefully constructed. Panic flared in her eyes, sharp and desperate. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, pulling out her phone again. "I'm calling the HOA president, and the city running an unlicensed restaurant in a residential zone is illegal." Alexis, you know that she held the phone up like a weapon, thumb hovering over the screen. "Shut it down now, or I report you for commercial zoning violations. Do you have any idea what the fines are? Thousands. They are put a lien on your house." The threat hung in the air, heavy and metallic. The guests murmured uncomfortable. Mason looked at me, his eyes pleading, "Just stop, please." But I didn't stop. I felt a cold, calm wash over me. The same focus I used when calculating rice times for dough or pruning tomato vines. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the fence. "Go ahead," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden silence, it carried perfectly. "Call them." Stephanie blinked. "Excuse me. Call the city." I repeated. "I know the codes, Stephanie. I checked them before I laid the first brick of this oven. Portland City Code, Title 33. This is a private residence. I am not charging anyone money. I am not advertising. I am feeding my family and my neighbors." I gestured to Mrs. Patricia, to Haley, to the couple from 3 doors down who had just wandered into the yard, drawn by the smell. "This is a dinner party," I said, "just like yours. Except mine doesn't violate Section 14 regarding commercial gatherings in residential zones." Stephanie froze. "What are you talking about?" "Your event planner," I said, pointing to the woman in black hovering by the catering trays. "Your paid staff. The ticketed entry for charity you mentioned in the invite to get around the guest limit rules. Technically, Stephanie, you are the one running an unlicensed commercial event. And if you call the city on me, I will be very happy to show them the invite you sent out." The color drained from Stephanie's face. She looked at Marcus Thorne, who was now suppressing a smile. She looked at her guests, who were suddenly very interested in their shoes. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I would," I said. "You wanted to talk about rules? Let's talk about rules. You don't get to use the law as a stick to beat me with, just because you're losing the popularity contest." The smell of burning bridges filled the air, accurate and final. I had just publicly humiliated her in front of the very people she lived to impress. I had exposed her hypocrisy, and I didn't regret a single second of it. Stephanie stood there, phone still raised, mouth opening and closing. She looked at Mason, expecting him to step in, to defend her, to restore the order. But Mason wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. And for the first time in years, he didn't look like a little brother afraid of his big sister. He looked like a man waking up from a long gray sleep. "She's right, Steph," he said quietly. Stephanie whipped her around. "What did you say?" "She's right," Mason repeated, his voice gaining strength. "You're charging a donation fee at the door. Alexis is just cooking." The betrayal hit Stephanie like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, her perfect composure shattering. And in that moment of weakness, the dam broke. Marcus Thorne, the illustrious food critic, cleared his throat. He set his untouched plate of cold tartlets on a gray side table. He smoothed his blue suit, and then, with the grace of a man deciding to leave a sinking ship, he walked toward the fence. "Excuse me," he said to me, his voice rich and amused. "Is that sourdough crust?" Marcus Thorne didn't just walk to the fence. He vaulted it. For a man in a tailored suit, he moved with surprising agility. He swung one long leg over the low barrier, then the other, landing softly on my mulch. He didn't look back at Stephanie. He walked straight to the table where Mrs. Patricia was holding a slice of pepperoni pizza, like it was a sacred artifact. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the pizza peel. "Be my guest," I said, handing him a fresh slice. He took a bite. He closed his eyes. A slow, contented sigh escaped him. My God, he murmured. The fermentation on this dough, it's perfect. 48 hours, cold ferment. I confirmed. San Marzano tomatoes, oak fire. It's brilliant, he said, opening his eyes and smiling at me. Absolutely brilliant. Do you have any wine? Real wine? Boxed red, Mrs. Patricia offered, pouring him a generous glass in a mason jar. But it hasn't been sitting in the sun for 3 hours. On the other side of the fence, the dam burst. Stephanie stood frozen, watching her prize guest defect to the peasant's side. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The remaining guests looked at each other, then at the empty platters of cold appetizers, then at the warm, glowing party next door. One by one, they started moving. First, the young couple I'd noticed earlier. They stepped tentatively to the gate. Is it okay if we join? The woman asked. Everyone is welcome, I said. Gates unlocked. Then another couple. Then 3 more. Within minutes, Stephanie's patio was emptying out. People were abandoning the gray silence for the laughter and warmth of my garden. They sat on the grass on overturned buckets on the retaining wall. Haley was handing out slices as fast as I could bake them. The air was filled with chatter and the clinking of jars. Stephanie was left standing alone in the center of her perfect empty stage. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She looked furious, humiliated, and utterly defeated. But the final blow didn't come from the guests. It came from Mason. He hadn't crossed the fence yet. He was standing near the catering table, staring down at something on the ground. It was a piece of paper, thick and cream-colored. That must have fallen from Stephanie's clutch during her tirade. He picked it up, he read it, and then he went very, very still. Steph, he said. His voice was strange, hollow. She whipped her head around, her eyes wild. What? What is it now? This isn't an invoice for an event planner, Mason said, holding up the paper. It's a final notice from a collections agency. Stephanie lunged for it, but he held it out of reach. Give me that. It says you're 3 months behind on the lease for your office. Mason read, his voice rising in disbelief. And there's another one here. Credit card debt, $50,000. He looked up at her, his face pale in the harsh patio lights. Stephanie, you told me your firm was having its best quarter ever. You told me you needed that loan from our joint savings for expansion. It is expansion. She shrieked, her voice cracking. It's an investment. You have to spend money to make money, Mason. You wouldn't understand. I understand that you lied to me, he said. You took our family money for Haley's college fund to pay for this. He gestured at the abandoned catering trays, the rented furniture, the gray facade, for a party to impress people who don't even like you. I did it for the family brand, she screamed. I did it for us. No, Mason said. You did it for you because you're terrified that if you stop pretending to be rich, people will realize you're just empty. It was the most brutal, honest thing he had ever said to her. The silence that followed was absolute. The guests in my garden stopped chewing. Marcus Thorne lowered his wine glass. Even Mrs. Patricia looked solemn. Stephanie stood there stripped bare. Her elitism, her cruelty, her obsession with brands and image, it wasn't strength. It was a frantic, expensive costume she wore to hide the fact that she was drowning. She wasn't a queen holding court. She was a bankrupt fraud throwing a party on a sinking ship. Mason dropped the paper. It fluttered to the gray slate like a white flag. He turned his back on his sister, walked to the fence, unlatched the gate, and stepped through. He didn't look at me. He looked at the ground ashamed. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't know. I swear, Alexis, I didn't know. I looked at him, then at Stephanie, alone in the ruins of her vanity. I know, I said. Grab a slice, Mason. It's hot. Stephanie didn't move. She stood amidst the wreckage of her inner circle event, a queen without a court. The invoice lay at her feet, a stark white testament to her deception. She looked at Mason, then at me, her eyes burning with a mixture of humiliation and fury. "You think you've won," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You think stealing my guests makes you better than me? This is my house, my patio. You're just squatters with a pizza oven." Actually, a growly voice interrupted. "That's not entirely accurate." Mrs. Patricia stood up from the garden table. She wiped her hands on a napkin, adjusted her silk kimono, and walked to the fence. She didn't look like an eccentric recluse anymore. She looked like a titan. "Mrs. Patricia." Stephanie frowned, confusion wearing with her anger. "What are you talking about? Go back to your Havel." "My Havel?" Mrs. Patricia said dryly. "Is the penthouse at the street Regis's? This townhouse? I bought it as a tax write-off." She leaned against the fence, her gaze sharp. "My name is Patricia Sterling. I own Sterling Development." Stephanie palled. Everyone in the city knew Sterling Development. They owned half the downtown district. You own this building?" Stephanie whispered. "I own the whole block," Mrs. Patricia corrected. "And I've been reviewing the lease agreements for this property. Specifically, the clause regarding commercial use of residential units." She gestured to the catering setup, the ticketed entry sign that had fallen over. The sheer scale of the event Stephanie had tried to host. "You've been using this unit as an event space for your failing business," Mrs. Patricia continued, her voice devoid of sympathy. "You've been charging admission. You've been violating noise ordinances, and you've been harassing your neighbors, my other tenants, with frivolous complaints." She looked at me and winked. Then she turned back to Stephanie. "I don't rent to bullies, Stephanie. And I certainly don't rent to frauds who don't pay their rent for 3 months. I can pay," Stephanie cried, desperation creeping into her voice. "I just need a little more time. The brand is taking off." "Your brand," Mrs. Patricia said, "is cruelty, and frankly, it's bad for property values." She pulled a folded envelope from her kimono pocket and handed it over the fence to Mason. "Eviction notice," she said simply. 30 days. Though, given the state of your finances, I suspect you'll be gone sooner." Stephanie stared at the envelope in Mason's hand. The fight drained out of her. Her shoulders slumped. The facade of the powerful, perfect influencer crumbled, leaving behind a scared, broke woman who had sacrificed everything for an image that wasn't real. "Mason," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Do something." Mason looked at the eviction notice, then at his sister. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked sad. "I can't fix this, Steph," he said. "I can't afford to fix this." He turned away from her, walked fully into my garden, and sat down next to Haley. He put his arm around our daughter, and for the first time in years, he looked like he was exactly where he belonged. Stephanie stood alone on her gray patio. The string lights I'd hung in the trees cast a warm glow on her face, highlighting the tears tracking down her cheeks. She looked at the party she had tried to destroy, the laughter, the food, the community, and realized too late that she could have been part of it. All she had to do was open the gate. Instead, she had built a wall, and now she was the only one trapped behind it. 6 weeks later, the for rent sign came down yesterday. A nice young couple is moving in next doors who asked if I could teach them how to grow tomatoes. Stephanie moved back in with our in-laws. Mason tells me she's in therapy trying to figure out why she needed to be better than everyone else to feel okay. We hope she finds peace, but she won't find it here. The fence between the yards is gone. We took it down the weekend. Stephanie moved out. Now the garden flows seamlessly from one side to the other. We built a long communal table that spans both properties. Every Sunday, it's full. Neighbors bring dishes. Haley teaches the kids how to make dough. Mrs. Patricia holds court at the head of the table, telling stories about the New York skyline in the 70s. Mason is learning to use the pizza peel, his laugh loud and uninhibited. We didn't need to be exclusive to be special. We didn't need a brand or a VIP list. We just needed warmth. We needed to be real. I looked around my Sunday sanctuary, watching the firelight dance on the faces of the people I love. I realized I didn't fight for a seat at Stephanie's table. I built a warmer one, and everyone was welcome. Sometimes the best revenge is just building a table where everyone is actually welcome. If you've ever had to build your own happiness after being shut out, share your story below. I read every single.